Hello everybody and welcome back to Double Play Baseball. We've got a special one for you today. It's one of our favorite videos of the year. We are building our perfect all-star teams down to the last player on the last spot on the bench. We're going starters, reserves, pitchers, same rules that apply to the major leagues. Every team's got to have a representative. You got to have a certain number of every position. We've really formulated this down last year, and to this year it's going to be even more fun. So I'm covering the NL, Ryan's covering the American League. We're doing starters, we're doing everything, but we're going to do it kind of like a reveal show. So Ryan, since you're doing the American League and I started last year, will you tell me who are the starters in the American League on your perfect American League All-Star Game roster?
Yeah, and preface this, we did this as a lineup too for at least the starters, so let us know also who wins based on how we construct our lineup, so there's a little strategy in here. But leading off for me, first baseman in the American League from the Tampa Bay Rays is Yandy Diaz. He's having an absolutely phenomenal year. He's got the second highest WRC plus, only behind Shohei, who you're going to see here in a little bit. Hitting second, playing center field, we have Luis Robert Jr. for the White Sox. He was kind of a late addition he wasn't a late addition, but he replaced someone hitting second who I ended up taking out as a starter. Still an all-star. You'll see that later. Hitting third, we have the DH, the GOAT, Shohei Ohtani from the Angels. Hitting fourth, we've got Jose Ramirez from the Cleveland Guardians playing third. Hitting fifth, playing right field, we have Randy Rosarena. And sixth, this is the person who I added in late. I didn't want to put him in, because he hadn't played enough games, but I decided he did play enough games for me. Left fielder is Yordan Alvarez for the Houston Astros. There's a couple guys like Seager and Judge who have the numbers to be on as a starter, but I rewarded the guys who played a little bit more, and Yordan Alvarez kind of fell into that category of not playing enough. But he's played more than Judge and Seager, so I rewarded him with the starting job. I gave it over Mike Trout. You're going to see him as an all-star, but he's not going to be a starter for me. Hitting seventh, playing shortstop for the Toronto Blue Jays, I've got Bo Bichette. And then 8 and 9 are both from the Texas Rangers, playing second base. Hitting eighth is Marcus Semien, and then the catcher, Jonah Heim, hitting ninth. That's my lineup. What stands out here? Do I have a good lineup?
You do have a good lineup, and I think it's pretty bold to leave Mike Trout off the list, but I do think this year it's the right decision. I mean, there are not many years where you say, yeah, Mike Trout's not an all-star starter, and, he's right up there in the voting. I think they voted him in as a starter, right, yesterday? But yep. I think it's the right choice to not have him as a starter. You named three outfielders that I think are having better seasons. When you talk about Randy Rosarena, Luis Robert, and the third one that I'm for some reason blanking on, right? Yordan Alvarez, who normally would be a DH but playing a little bit more outfield this year. So I think all three of those guys are having better seasons than Trout, where it's a down year for Trout, which is still a really, really good year, and a year that if you didn't have him on the All-Star reserves list, I think you were crazy. But I think it's the right choice to not have him as a starter, and I like the lineup construction. Yandy Diaz, you don't see many first basemen lead off, but he's an on-base guy, so I think that'll work. I think maybe you got Bo Bichette a little bit too down in the order. I would have had him a little bit higher, I think, but that's personal preference. And I honestly don't have a problem with any of your starters.
And I forgot to mention my starting pitcher. We'll name that with the starting lineup. From the Tampa Bay Rays, starting for the second year in a row, Shane McClanahan. Did you have that on your bingo card that McClanahan would be starting back-to-back All-Star games just a couple years ago?
I don't think I had it on my bingo card, but coming into this year, of course, with him doing it last year, it wasn't out of the question, and I think that's the right choice as well. He's who I would have gone with the American League, and you don't see many guys make back-to-back All-Star game starts, so for Shane McClanahan to do that at such a young age, that's a big deal.
And he was a guy I got in fantasy baseball as kind of a throw-in to a deal surrounding Tatis a couple years ago. And so now I got a great player of that, so that's great. Let's hear your starters for the National League.
All right, so starting things off in the National League, it's the best player in the National League so far this year, playing right field from the Atlanta Braves. I've got Ronald Acuna Jr. Acuna has just been insane this year. He was immediately voted in by the fans, and I think that was the right decision. I'm rewarding him by leading him off. I've got Luis Arraez, the second baseman from the Miami Marlins, hitting second. Two guys I really wanted to hit leadoff, so I just put them 1 and 2, starting righty-lefty. At first base, from your Los Angeles Dodgers, I'm going Freddie Freeman, who's had a really good season. Slower month this month, but still a freaky year so far. A 317 average, 152 WRC+, which is best among first basemen. He was a lock choice for me. it was hard for me to find a cleanup hitter because a lot of these guys are having really nice seasons, but I don't consider them true power hitters. And I wanted to switch up all the lefties that are in this order, so I'm going with the right-hander. It's the catcher, Sean Murphy from the Atlanta Braves. Murphy leads National League catchers in OPS, WRC+, WAR, home runs, and runs batted in. So I rewarded him, put him in the cleanup spot. So in the top 4 spots, you've got 2 Braves, a Dodger, and a Marlin. At the 5 spot, the rookie playing center field in his first ever All-Star game. I'm going Corbin Carroll from the Arizona Diamondbacks. Right behind him, playing left field, it's more of a seasoned guy, but still a young guy. Juan Soto making the start. He was my 3rd outfielder behind Acuna and Carroll, but I think he's deserving of a start. I'm hitting him 6th. And then you've got the final 3 in the order. Drops off a tiny bit, but still 3 guys who are having great seasons. It starts with the designated hitter from Los Angeles. I'm going with JD Martinez, who just barely sneaked in over another player for my DH spot with his performance yesterday. I've got Geraldo Perdomo getting the start at shortstop, which... where was that on your bingo card? He's from the Arizona Diamondbacks, just beat out another guy for shortstop, but he's got a 133 WRC+, which is the best among National League shortstops, 2.7 WAR, which is tied for second. Thought he deserved to be in there. And then rounding things out, the third baseman for my San Francisco Giants, I'm going JD Davis, who leads third baseman in the National League in WRC+ and WAR, and he's been an above average defender for the first time in his career, so he gets the starting spot at third and rounds things out. Oh, we're doing pitcher 2 this early. I'm not going Marcus Stroman, who I think a lot of people have as their starter. I'm going from the Arizona Diamondbacks, yet another starter from Arizona. I'm going the right-hander, Zach Gallen.
You know, it's really interesting to see that you 3 Diamondbacks starting, and it's not a knock on you. I think you definitely got that right, them deserving it. But it's kind of... Gallen, you can maybe predict it was kind of a hot take a little bit that he was going to be the Cy Young going into this year. But for Corbin Carroll and Perdomo to also be starting the All-Star game, I mean... I know in your lineup, of course, Perdomo's not starting the real All-Star game, but Corbin Carroll is. So those guys are having a deserving year, and it's kind of the reason why the Diamondbacks have been in control of the NL West for so long. And otherwise, I think you got this right. These players are all deserving of it. A little bit of a down year just across the board in some of the spots in the National League. Like, who would have thought J.D. Davis would be starting third base when you got Arenado and Machado and some other guys in there? And then, you know, there definitely are some firepower towards the top of that. So I think star power-wise, my lineup is a little bit better, but I think you definitely did get it right. I mean, we always see the American League win the All-Star game anyway, so I got a little bit of an advantage on there.
Yeah, it is really crazy. I don't know if you would agree with this. I'd argue that, like, as a whole, team-wise, I think the National League is better than the American League. Would you agree with that? Like, not all-star team-wise. I'm talking, like, teams in the respective leagues. Like, you're talking West, Central, and East. Like, I'd say the National League is better than the American League.
I would say going into this year, yes, I would have agreed. But with some teams like the Mets, Phillies, and Padres, kind of 3 teams that you thought were going to be at the top of that, they're struggling. So, you know, I'm not sure results-wise. I think it would definitely be close, and there's an argument for either side. But in terms of talent, I think the National League is probably a little bit better.
Yeah, I would say that, like, team-wise, I'd say the National League is better. But when you're talking about star power, talent-wise, like, just individual players, the American League, for some reason, is always more stacked than the National League. I mean, just looking on the left side of the infield, you're right. Perdomo and J.D. Davis, they don't exactly stack up to Bo Bichette and Jose Ramirez, or the guys that you had to leave off of your starting list on that left side of the infield in the American League. So it is really interesting. You always see, you know, a couple of those guys sneak in there, and I know that, you know, Perdomo got passed over for Orlando Arcia by the fans, and JD Davis got passed over for Nolan Arenado, 2 guys who I don't have Arcia or Arenado on my All-Star teams. I don't think they're really deserving to be there. I don't think they're deserving of being starters. So that's why I'm glad we kind of do this experiment to shed light on guys that deserve it a little bit more, in my opinion.
So let's go ahead and move on to the reserves now. I'll rattle these one off. I sorted it by position, so I'm gonna kind of name it not a lineup, but going by position. Starting off with the catcher, the backup catcher, whereas the one that lost out in the fan vote as well. I've got Adley Rutschman of the Baltimore Orioles making his first All-Star game, and then moving on to the first base, we've got Ryan Noda of the Oakland A's. He is the A's representative, and this one, you know, kind of surprisingly enough, if you look at the numbers, this one isn't really one I had to do too much forcing into. Noda's having a great year. It's an argument for an all-star year, but being, of course, on a bad team helps him getting this spot because they've got to have a representative. The backup second baseman for the Angels, I've got Brandon Drury, who's kind of been a utility man this year, but the majority of his games have come at second base, and second base in the American League is a position that's weak behind Marcus Semien. Moving on to third base, I've got two guys on this one. So kind of the way it worked, I was able to have one at each position and then two at-large guys where I could go anywhere for this. Third base was one of the ones that got two people. The first one who made it in pretty easily was Isaac Paredes for the Tampa Bay Rays. And then the starter in the American League in real life, or in the real rosters, made it as the third, a kind of at-large player. That's Josh Young of the Texas Rangers. Moving on to shortstop, we had Bo Bichette as the starter. The two backups are going to be Wander Franco, who is the AL leader in WAR, besides Shohei Ohtani, and then Corey Seager, who's got above a 1,000 OPS. He's going to be starting the real game as well. Moving on to the outfield, I've got three backups in this one. First one is Adolis Garcia for the Texas Rangers. Mike Trout, who I mentioned I left off as a starter. And then Aaron Judge, who I rewarded as an all-star for his season. I know he's a starter because of the fans. His numbers are ridiculous. 189 WRC+, over 1,000 OPS, 2.8 WAR, in only 49 games. And that's the number that really kept me from keeping him as a starter, is the only 49 games. The backup DH is going to be Justin Turner of the Red Sox. He is their representative to round things off for the reserves.
I remember that we did legacy players as well, which I realized that we forgot to mention to the fans, where the MLB last year rewarded some veterans that are legacy all-stars. Was yours a hitter, or did you go with a pitcher?
I really had a tough time thinking of a legacy player. We gave it to Miguel Cabrera last year, or that is Major League Baseball did. So I really wasn't even sure that there was one deserving of a legacy player in the American League.
Interesting. All right. Well, I like the reserves. I think you did make the right decision with Aaron Judge. Like, probably if you're just going with his numbers, like you look at the slash lines, you look at WRC plus, everything like that, should be a starter. But when you're only playing 49 games, I mean, the league, most teams just passed the halfway point of the season where everyone's played 81 games now. Not playing even 50 so far for Judge. It's hard to make him a starter, but I do still think he deserves to be on the All-Star team. So I like the decision there. You look, there's a couple more Rays on the bench, which I think you're seeing some of the best teams this year be rewarded with the All-Stars when you're talking about the Rays, the Rangers. You have Adley Rutschman from the Orioles in there as well. So I think there's some good representation for some of the best teams. And there are guys in there that you wouldn't have expected. I don't know if I thought Justin Turner was going to be maybe the second best DH behind Shohei Ohtani in the American League. So I think it's a good mix of guys on good teams that are playing well that maybe we expected to be there, but also some surprises.
Absolutely. And I think across the board, these guys are deserving. Justin Turner and it was Ryan Noda were the two players that from this who are going to be the only represented from their team. There's a couple more pitchers that are that as well. But like I said, with Ryan Noda, he was kind of almost deserving of All-Stars. The same thing with Justin Turner. Justin Turner was very similar to a couple other DHs, but being a Red Sox kind of helped him out to be the backup DH for me. So, and that they're being Red Sox not really having a star player. You think it would be Devers going into this year, who hasn't had that great of a year. So these guys, you're right, mix of players that you expected: Mike Trout, Aaron Judge, the big names, and then some players who are being rewarded with some good years. How about you for the reserves?
Yeah, my bench starts with probably the closest non-starter, and I know that you tried to sway me the other way, but at catcher, it's Will Smith of the LA Dodgers. He just pales in comparison to what Sean Murphy's done this year. In more at-bats, he was behind on all those stats. You talk about everything that Sean Murphy was first in, Will Smith is basically second, so he'll catch half the game if I was the manager, so he'll get a chance to play a lot in the All-Star game. I think, if I'm not mistaken, this would be his first All-Star game bid, right?
Yep.
So Will Smith is there at catcher. I've got two first basemen because one is more of a utility guy. First, it is the lone representative from the St. Louis Cardinals, a team that we thought, maybe could have had 4 or 5 All-Stars. It's Paul Goldschmidt. He's at first after his MVP season. He's there behind Freddie Freeman. He's second in most categories among NL first basemen. My other utility/first baseman spot goes to Lamont Wade Jr., who's got, I think he might have the second best or best on-base percentage in all of the National League. I put him in there as a second first baseman, but he also plays outfield, so he's a utility spot, and he's killed the ball this year. He's right up there with Freeman and Goldschmidt, and a little bit above, I think, Alonso and Christian Walker, 2 guys that I had to leave off that I'm going to talk about later, and guys that just missed the cut. Second baseman, I only have one reserve, and it's Ketel Marte, who's having a phenomenal year. Would start in most other years if Luis Arraez wasn't doing what he's doing so far this season. Up the middle as well, I've got shortstop Dansby Swanson, who was close to starting over Geraldo Perdomo, but I just couldn't look past some of the lower offensive numbers. He's got the WAR on Perdomo, but that mostly comes from defense. He's the lone shortstop I picked to back up Perdomo. I've got 2 third basemen, and it's 2 guys that I needed to put in there because the other teams just didn't have much guys that I wanted to put in for representation. We first starts with the lone national. It's Jeimer Candelario, third baseman from Washington, and then Ryan McMahon, who's the lone Colorado Rockies representative. McMahon's having an okay season. I think he's like a 110 WRC plus guy, but really the Rockies are so barren when it comes to all-star candidates that I had to go with McMahon. I named 4 outfielders as backups. Starts with Fernando Tatis Jr., who was close to starting for me, but with a slower start to the year because he was missing those games due to his suspension. Couldn't put him in the starting list, and I thought that Soto deserved it over him because he's been there for the full season on the same team. I've got Mookie Betts from the Dodgers, who's in there as well, continues to make all-star games. Nick Castellanos is I believe the lone rep. No, he's one of 2 Phillies, but I needed to find a way to get some Phillies in there, which is kind of crazy to say because of how star-studded they are. But Castellanos having a great season. WRC plus above 130, deserved to be in there. Christian Yelich is the one of 2 Brewers on the team. He's my last outfielder. And then I've got a DH left on the bench and a legacy player. Starts with Jorge Soler, who was very close to being a starter for me at DH, but he's the backup. And my legacy player from the Pittsburgh Pirates, I went with Andrew McCutchen.
Yeah, that's a good legacy pick, and I guess if you're going to go McCutchen, there's a guy who I could go as a legacy pick who I thought was kind of could be there, but I don't really know if he should have been. He's going to be a pitcher, so I'll mention him there. But I like that list. There's a lot of good players on there as well who kind of, like you said, could be starters, and kind of you would assume they'd be in that conversation for starters. So a great team as well. I think you got them right.
Yeah, third base is really the position that kind of messed things up. I mean, you have J.D. Davis starting. I think he deserves to start, but then if you're arguing, Jeimer Candelario, Ryan McMahon over maybe guys like Austin Riley and Nolan Arenado, who I'm sure that Braves and Cardinals fans are going to be screaming about, maybe you could argue that they're deserving. I'd have to go back deeper into the stats, but I needed to get a National on this team. I needed to get a Rocky on this team, and this seemed like the best place to go. There were other options for the Nationals that I decided to go against because they were in stronger positions. But for the Rockies, McMahon, even though he's only like a 110 WRC plus guy, he's the only option on the Rockies. There's not a pitcher. There's not another hitter. I just had to find a way to get Colorado on this list.
Yeah, I'm kind of worried for the real team when they announce those. I believe this is going to come out tomorrow, which is Saturday, and the real team's going to come out on Sunday. So if you're watching this before the teams are out, I'm worried that Elias Diaz is going to make it as the Rocky representative catcher, and then they're going to snub Will Smith of another All-Star game. So we'll see. I'm sure there'll be some reserve or replacements that will come as well, which we didn't really name any of those, but there could be some players who get as replacements, so I'm confident that Will Smith will be an All-Star. But moving on to my pitchers, I mentioned Shane McClanahan is the starter. He's the MLB ERA leader. Going down in no particular order, I did not rank these and how much of a lock they were, rather just listed some pitchers who are All-Stars. Kevin Gausman for the Toronto Blue Jays is the pitcher's WAR leader. Nathan Eovaldi for the Texas Rangers. He had that crazy month in May where he was going 8 or 9 innings every time. Sonny Gray for the Twins makes it as one of 2 Twins on this team. Framber Valdez for the Astros, who's right behind McClanahan for kind of that AL Cy Young race. Garrett Cole for the Yankees makes it. Luis Castillo for the Mariners, I think he slowed down a bit, but he was great early on. John Gray for the Rangers makes it, surprisingly. And then the lone Tiger representative is Eduardo Rodriguez, who was amazing before his injury. He doesn't have as many innings as some of the other guys, so I kind of had to force him on there, but his ERA was in the low twos when he was pitching. He was on his way to an all-star caliber season, so I threw him on here as the Tigers representative.
I know you have Sonny Gray on there as representative for the Twins, but where's Joe Ryan?
Joe Ryan was the guy who I had to take off to throw on Eduardo Rodriguez. He was the last pitcher on there, and I was looking, I needed Tigers, and there's really no other Tiger that could be here. So I threw on Eduardo Rodriguez, had to take off Joe Ryan.
Yeah, it's really interesting because, again, this is a situation where I think the AL is more stacked than the National League, because Joe Ryan would make it over half or maybe 3/4 of the pitchers here on my National League list. I mean, you can name, I'm trying to just rack my brain for like any pitchers I'm thinking of that might have also gotten snubbed in the American League. I mean, you also look at the Twins, they've got like Pablo Lopez, but I think Gray and Ryan have been better than him. I think you did a good job. It's like all those guys though were like aces, and the National League, which I'll get into in a second, it was more slim pickings, I think, and I think Ryan would have deserved to make it over. And I think it does get hard when you have to sneak a team in there. Should I go through my starters before you name your relievers?
Go ahead.
All right, so I've already mentioned I've got Zach Gallen starting. He got the start over Marcus Stroman for me, but I do have Marcus Stroman as an all-star. I'm going in no particular order as well. After Stroman, we go to Mitch Keller for the Pittsburgh Pirates. I believe he was, outside of Andrew McCutchen, who's a legacy player, my only representative for the Pittsburgh Pirates. I thought about adding another Cub in Justin Steele, but you kind of talked me out of it. I ended up replacing him with someone who was really close to making it. I'm going Zach Wheeler over Steele just because of the innings thing. I've got Zach Wheeler being on there, one of two Phillies. Clayton Kershaw from the Los Angeles Dodgers makes yet another All-Star game. If he had thrown a couple more innings so far, he might have had a chance to start with how good he's been. Bryce Elder makes it over his Braves teammate Spencer Strider, which is interesting for me. I think Strider's a better pitcher, don't get me wrong about that. I mean, I think Strider will have a better second half, but I don't take expected stats into account whatsoever. Bryce Elder leads the National League in ERA, so I had to put him on the list. After him, I've got Logan Webb, who's thrown the most innings in the National League, and ERA in the low threes. He deserved to make it. And then my final starting pitcher, another Diamondback, who I think lead my team in representation. It's Merrill Kelly, who's got an ERA in the twos. He's been fantastic this year. I think I told you yesterday, I think I've got 5 D-backs on this whole All-Star team.
That is a lot, and we talk about bingo cards that I would not have had that going into this season. And it's funny you mentioned that I kind of talked you out of Justin Steele, because when we were talking about that, it was more of a effort to keep him on there in my mind, and not necessarily I was fighting for him, but there was another player that we were fighting about, or not necessarily. You know what I'm talking about.
He's on the list of guys who just missed.
Yeah, and so I was thinking of a guy you had who was definitely an argument. It was Logan Webb, who, when I was going there, I was like, maybe it was because I was comparing to mine. Like you said, you were in charge of the National League, so I didn't do a deep look at it. But I was thinking, like, Logan Webb, is he really an all-star? So I was going through some guys after looking at the stats, like, do you have Steele on there? Because I was thinking of guys who I might have over Webb, and then I guess caused you to look at Steele again and take him off. But overall, these are guys, because we shared these beforehand. I didn't really have a big problem with any of these guys being on, or anyone missing out as well.
Yeah, and my philosophy here is I reward guys that have thrown all season and have thrown a lot of innings. Like, Steele's been really good. He missed time with injury. The guy you were referencing that you wanted on the list that is on my just missed list is Michael Wacha of the Padres. Like, Waka's been really good, but he didn't even start the season on the actual rotation, so he's thrown, sometimes 20 or 30 less innings than these other guys I have. So when it came to the case of Webb, also being a Giants fan, my 1 year to do the National League, I wanted to have Webb on the list, but I reward guys who have thrown innings and who are going out there, as aces for their teams, and Webb has thrown the most innings in the National League. After this blow-up start against Toronto that he just had, his ERA's, I think, in the 3.4s. Before that, it was in the 3.1s. So if you're throwing that many innings and you're still being a low 3 ERA pitcher, I prefer those guys to maybe a guy who's in the high 2s but has thrown 30 to 40 less innings. So I definitely reward going out there every 5 days, going deep into games, and really going out there, first game of a series on a big series against a rival team, and being that first guy out. I kind of reward those guys a little bit more than the smaller sample size, better efficiency guys.
I guess that's just philosophy, and we'll see what the managers choose come Sunday. But moving on to my relief pitchers, we've got some guys you would expect to be on here, and then some surprises going into this year. Starting off number one, or not number one, once again, not in any order. I've got Felix Bautista of the Orioles, who I want to say he's among, he might have the lowest ERA, or no, he's his teammate Yennier Cano has the lowest ERA, I believe, who is also right here as another Oriole representative for a relief pitcher. And then Clase, you kind of expect that he's there for the Guardians. Duran for the Twins, and then Chapman for the Royals. He was their Royals' only representative. Chapman was maybe second or third in terms of guys who would have just missed. But being a reliever, there wasn't a strong case for someone being way over him. So he makes it as the Royals representative, and he's had a resurgence with his velo, so it's kind of been fun to watch for him. Will most likely be a trade piece at the deadline. So that's my relief pitchers.
Yeah, biggest takeaway for me is I'm happy that you had the two Orioles. I think I'm a little scared of when it comes into the actual teams that they're going to name Bautista and leave off Cano just because sometimes closers get the nods and then the setup guys don't get in. But I really do think that Cano deserves to be there just as much as Bautista. So I'm glad that you took up 2 of the 5 spots for the Orioles, and that's just a testament to how good Baltimore's bullpen has been. Those two guys deserve it. I think maybe more than any other relievers in the American League. Like, they've been that good.
They have been, and I think I don't have the stats in front of me, and I didn't write them down, but I think those are the 2 of the top 3 leaders in bullpen ERA for the American League. So they've both been amazing. They both deserve it, like you said.
Yeah, I've got 5 relievers as well. I believe all 5 of mine, you can consider them closers. One of the guys is more of a hybrid, and so I'll start with him. It's David Robertson, who is my lone representative from the New York Mets. Like, crazy to say that for how well we've talked about, the Mets coming into this season, how much we hyped up their lineup. I don't have a single Mets hitter on this entire All-Star team. Don't have a starting pitcher as well with Scherzer, Senga, Verlander, all those guys on the team. I went with David Robertson as my lone Mets representative. He's been really good this season. Been a hybrid guy, saves as well as holds and pitching earlier in games. But the rest of them are closers. You've got Camilo Doval from the Giants, who I believe is tied for the most saves in the National League and has an ERA, I believe, like below 1.5. He's been amazing. Alexis Diaz from the Cincinnati Reds is my lone Reds representative. Completely deserving, though. I didn't have to force him in whatsoever. Josh Hader from the Padres, bouncing back this season in San Diego. And then I have Devin Williams from the Milwaukee Brewers, who I still think deserves to be on there, but it was getting close between should I have him and Yelich, maybe just one of them, but I still think Williams has deserved it. He doesn't have the saves that some of these other closers do because the Brewers haven't given him as many save situations, but he's still been as good as ever for Milwaukee.
I think those are good as well. It's hard. I think the National League has better relievers than the American League, and it's hard when you can only name 5. A guy I would have loved to see on there was obviously Evan Phillips, who's been great, and I know you said he didn't really have the saves, and he's been more used as a high leverage rather than a closer, but there's some, like I said, good guys on there, guys that are dominated. A guy I was shout out to, Jesse Chavez for the Braves, who did you think he was going to have a low 1s ERA going into this year? He's been on the Braves like 6 different times. He keeps leaving and finds his way back, so he's been good for them this year. And like I said, it's hard when you have 5 players, but I like it.
Yeah, I mean, I had to leave off 2 closers that I wanted on there. You mentioned Evan Phillips. I also bring up David Bednar, who's maybe been, like, efficiency-wise the best reliever in the National League, but the Pirates, with their slide recently, he just hasn't gotten very much opportunity to pitch, and he gets passed up. I would have had him on there, I think, over David Robertson, but with Robertson needing a Mets representative, he gets in there. But those are 2 guys I had to leave off. Getting into the kind of the rest of the guys that just missed, or these are guys that I would put up there as potential replacements. Say someone's got to pull out because they have to go home, or someone gets like kind of nicked up, injured before the All-Star game. These are the guys I would want the league to look at as replacements. I'm kind of going position-wise. how I wrote him down. It's kind of random, but I've got Thairo Estrada from the Giants, who's a hybrid middle infielder. Christian Walker, who was just left off at first base because I already had 3 guys there. Pete Alonso as well, I think could make his way on there if you needed a first baseman or a DH. He's been good, hits a home run still, but was just a little below the slash line of the other guys I had there. Spencer Steer can play third or first, and he was close for me. I would have had him on there if I didn't need to get Candelario and Ryan McMahon in. TJ Friedel, who's another guy from the Reds who fell a little bit short. Lane Thomas is another national I considered, but the outfield was so strong, so he's off. Same with Brandon Nimmo and Spencer Strider, 2 guys who have had good years, but the positions are pretty strong, and Strider had a tough past month, so his ERA is ballooned up a little bit more. I also have Michael Wacha and Kodai Senga, who I've already mentioned, Justin Steele as well, and then Evan Phillips and David Bednar would be 2 of my relief choices if some of these guys can't make it on.
Yeah, that is crazy. Before I get into a few guys, I didn't have as many for my just missed, but it is crazy. I want to touch back on that the Mets only have the one. You mentioned the lineup, and then also Scherzer and Verlander. I know Verlander was hurt to start the year, but you would have thought those guys would be in the conversation for All-Stars, and at least if they needed a representative, it would be one of those stars. But to have to kind of force on a bullpen arm is ridiculous and kind of a testament to what the Mets are experiencing this season. They are heavily struggling, to put it nicely. My snubs, first one, I've got 2 in the outfield. Alex Verdugo, who could have been the Red Sox representative. It got a little weaker. If I did value games played and left Judge and Yordan off, Verdugo would have made it. But kind of taken into the account that they've played just close to enough, Verdugo didn't really stand a chance against those guys. Another outfielder was Austin Hayes, who's been really good and has kind of been good, like pretty good for the last couple years, and very underrated player. Brent Rooker was a guy who I had for the A's as the backup DH before putting Justin Turner there. Another guy who could make it on as the A's representative, but also has a case to be an actual All-Star. Nathaniel Lowe at first base had a case too to be there instead of Ryan Noda, the other A's representative. And then, like you said, Joe Ryan as a pitcher was on there until I had kind of force on Eduardo Rodriguez.
Thank you so much for tuning into this video. If you enjoyed it, make sure to give us a like, leave a subscribe, and hit the notification bell as well. You can follow us on all of our social media pages, as well as check out these videos around me for other content from our show.